The SEC has released its fall schedule. Today, I talk one-on-one with former newspaper reporter Phil Bowman for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Phil Bowman, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Well, thank you for having me. What a great day to be talking about life in the Low Country, and high school football is certainly that.
Yes, sir. And, also, there's a lot of things going on right now. As you know, the SEC has their opening week schedule for September 26th. And the following colleges and universities are obviously playing each other. Mississippi State at LSU, Alabama at Missouri, Georgia at Arkansas, Tennessee at South Carolina, Vanderbilt at Texas A&M, Kentucky at Auburn, Florida at Ole Miss. You're a former newspaper sports reporter. What team sticks out in your mind?
Well, here's the thing. I think college football and the sports world is a reflection of society today. We can't agree. We have the Big Ten passing on football season, and we have the Pac-12.
Yeah.
And, some people are criticizing the Big Ten and the Pac-12 for pulling the plug too early. But here's the thing. What happens when you start tackling? What happens when you start huddling? And if the virus erupts, what happens to the colleges that are playing college football?
And I'm going to get to you about that in just a second, but will Alabama and Georgia be undefeated this season in your mind?
That's a good question. I think a lot of teams will be undefeated. Of course, everybody who knows me knows that I'm from Ohio State.
Right.
And one of the casualties of the coronavirus right off the bat was, for example, Ohio State is not going to play Bowling Green. Right. Bowling Green is going to lose $1.3 million. That's going to infect their entire athletic program. Again, it's a big issue. It's money. Those games that you mentioned, they're all great TV viewing. And, another question is how many fans are going to be getting into the games, and how and who decides?
And let me ask you more about that, because obviously, University of South Carolina Athletic Director Ray Tanner said on 107.5 radio that if there are games with limited capacity, the school could be looking, as you mentioned, at least $40 to $70 million in lost revenue from a budget around $127 million. He also said that he turns his attention to the idea that the department can make up money down the line, but players won't be able to make up lost years or careers. How many games do you project having limited capacity? And how much money where can they make up this money?
Well, the thing that drives sports today is money, and nowhere is that more obvious than NFL. And NFL has a high stake in this show, and that's why they're playing. But these are professional athletes who get paid to take risk, who are financially rewarded. Here in the college level, you have guys who are just like you and I were back when we were younger, except they were incredibly athletic.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, all the risk is going to be on the players.
Huh. That's interesting. And I know, obviously, too, when you look at these teams, which teams would be competitive this season?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. And when you look at those teams, once again, which teams are competitive this season?
Well, before Ohio State pulled the plug, I think that they were one of definitely the top four. I think Justin Fields, who's trying to get the Big Ten to resurrect their football goals, I think he was a true first-round pick and a Heisman. Since Ohio State's not going to be in there, and another game we're not going to see because of the virus was Ohio State and Oregon.
Right.
And whoever won that game might have had one of the 4 seats at the NCAA playoffs. But, you have to like Clemson. And, the one thing I'm interested in seeing is, what happens to that team. It's going to be a tight-knit group. They're going to have to get together. They're going to have to live together on and off the field. They're going to have to develop trust. They're going to be part of their inner circles. And what happened in Cleveland with the Indians. Right. You had a couple pitchers go out to eat with friends, and, that ripped the team apart. So it's going to involve a lot of trust, and it's going to be a lot of risk. People like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence, I don't think they really have anything to prove this year. And, some people are saying, why risk a $30 million payday?
And obviously, when you talk about that, will any of these teams actually make it to the playoffs?
Well, it's a good thing. Here's what people have to understand: the NCAA is in charge of all the NCAA championships. Well, guess what? The college football playoffs are not. So there could be an attempt to have a college football playoff. You'd have the Big 12, you'd have ACC, and you'd have the SEC. So probably two SEC teams, an ACC team, and a Big 12. And you know what happens to the Big 12 when they get in the playoffs? I
That's
mean,
right.
they tackle like they're turnstiles.
Yes,
So,
indeed.
but anyway, who knows what's going to happen? I just think that, some people are tired of living a quarantine life and they want their sports, whether it's baseball in a 60-game season, whether it's Ohio State or Michigan or Clemson, where, you have some alumni. And one of the reasons why they contribute is because they feel connected to the university because of the football program.
And I was talking with Jeff Barber with Charleston Southern University just last week, and he says, "Hey, all the players, all the student athletes, all the staff members, even himself, will be tested a couple of days prior to these games. What else can you expect this year?"
Well, if it's like anything else, you can expect surprises. Let's say, for example, let's use the St. Louis Cardinals. They have played about 5 games so far when most of the teams have played 20 something. And here's the thing: what happens if Clemson goes in and plays, a team that's obviously weaker, but all of a sudden they're dealing with like 6 players who come down with the coronavirus? Maybe you get 3 of the top offensive players and you get 3 of the top defensive players. What happens? What does that prove if a team, has to forfeit a playoff game because they have too many people who are suffering from the coronavirus?
And this is a question I keep asking, and I don't know if I ever got an answer, but can some of these teams go back and play each other again and again and again?
I don't know if that's going to happen. What I thought was interesting, for some of the schedule, like the Big Ten and, Ohio State and Michigan, that's about as end of season as you can get.
Mm.
And they scheduled that right in the middle of the season. And I was sort of surprised that some of these big rivalry games weren't right off the bat to get the TV ratings and to get the ticket sales. And we got the season going, and all of a sudden it's October, November, and we don't know what's going to happen with this virus. And, let's say we do get through the season and you've got 4 teams in the final 4 and 2 of them get ravaged by the virus. What's going to happen?
Yeah, exactly right. And what teams do you actually want to see play this season?
What I would like to see is, I think that my final 4 would be, in a perfect world without the virus, I think it would be Ohio State. I think it would be Clemson. I'd love to see an Ohio State Clemson game. I know some people probably think I like pain, and I do, but I think that is a great matchup. And then again, you've got Alabama,
Right,
and you could have a Georgia. You never know what Michigan's going to do,
right.
in the perfect world. And, maybe in Oregon, what happens if Oregon beats Ohio State before all this happens? If they beat Ohio State and they win the Pac-12 championship, and Ohio State still wins the Big Ten, so you'd have Oregon, Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson. I think that would be an incredible TV bonanza. And
Yes.
I think one day I'd love to see, I'm going to promote it right here, I'd love to see an 8-game playoff.
Oh, it may just happen, God willing. And obviously, there's a talk about moving games that were already scheduled for those dates. Will that complicate things even further?
Well, here's the thing. Some schools, there's talk, especially like at the high school level,
Right.
of moving the contact sports. And, the contact sports are football. And if you've ever watched high school volleyball, around that net, there's a lot of contact. And then you have wrestling. There's talk about moving those sports to the spring and then having baseball and, other spring sports in the fall. But let's say, for example, if you're an accomplished baseball player, you've already got plans to play in the travel league this fall. So what happens if your high school switches to play in the fall?
And the Big South Conference announced last week that it's delaying its fall sports season with the intent of playing it in the spring. This includes the sports of men's and women's cross country, football, men and women's soccer, and volleyball. And additionally, fall competitions in the sports of men and women's golf and men and women's tennis and out-of-season competitions in spring sports have been suspended as well. The Big South football members voted to allow up to 4 non-conference games in the fall at the institutional discretion. So for schools such as CSU, what discretion should they take now?
Well, I mean, if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard CSU canceling a couple practices because of player concerns. And when you play at the level of Charleston Southern, the money stakes shouldn't be as high. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that a decision should be made at the local, at the CSU level. If you have enough players who are concerned about getting the virus, you have to listen to your team players.
Oh, exactly right. And obviously, you talk a lot about money during this particular interview, but how much money should all of these colleges and universities should be prepared to lose?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Stanford, which was number 2 in athletic programs offered, cut like 11. And, they blame it on lost revenue. And here's a school that has an endowment of about $28 billion. So, they're not making the effort to even save these sports. And of course, the one school that has the most sports to offer, believe it or not, is Ohio State. And why Ohio State is because they have a football team that Wall Street would estimate at worth of $1.5 billion. But when you talk about the money that's contributed by the boosters, ticket sales, and merchandising, you've got a football team that pays for everything, gives money to the athletic department, and gives money to the university. And that's an athletic department that depends on football. So, it's crazy what's going to happen. If Ohio State can't play football, which evidently they won't,
right,
you're going to look at sports like girls field hockey, maybe men's and women's soccer. You're still going to have football, but you're going to lose some sports. And I think the big losers will be the girls who play women's sports in college.
And what should the high school athletic departments depend on right now?
Well, that's a good question. I followed high school sports as the guy at the Post and Courier, and what always fascinated me is anytime there were legal issues. And, you remember back in the good old days, back in the early 2000s, when it seemed like you'd always have a high-profile football player, attempting to transfer to a school.
Right.
And the high school league gets drawn into this, and people don't realize that something like that could cost them $30,000 to $50,000 in legal fees. So if they do play high school football this year, if they do play sports, the first thing you're going to ask yourself, who is legally responsible for allowing high school football games? And let's say, for example, all these parents and all these kids who, signed these waivers saying, I understand the risk.
Right.
But let's say, for example, you're Johnny Smith and you play ABC High School and you're one of the top junior running backs in the state and the country. What happens if you feel compelled to, that you feel like, you're forced to play because you might have a scholarship, your team's counting on you? What happens if you play and you get the virus and you can't ever even really have a normal life again? Who is responsible? Everybody would say, well, the high school league allowed this. And a lawsuit involving that would be catastrophic for the high school league. They would probably lose their insurance. And if they didn't have insurance, there would be no high school sports. So I think, they're trying to have normalcy, but I think once we get a couple weeks further down the road, we're going to see a lot of things change.
Speaking of changes, you talked briefly about it in the last answer, but scholarships, what is the future of that in this era of the COVID-19?
Well, it depends on, first of all, are you getting a scholarship? Or secondly, are you, handing out a scholarship? I'm going to use what I know about Ohio State and its recruiting. They have some incredible recruits coming in 2021. It's always Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson. But some of these kids, who are seniors this year, have opted not to play high school football. And Ohio State says, we honor that. We feel that you're good enough right now. You have nothing to prove by playing your senior year. We want you on campus. We want you healthy. And, in the meantime, take care of your academics and take care of your health. If you're a running back and you're not going to play high school football this senior year because of the virus, you don't want to go to your college and look like the Pillsbury Doughboy.
And you talk about those recruits. How much will that change?
Can you repeat that?
And you talked earlier about recruits. How much will that change?
Recruiting, it's crazy what's happening. We have the early signing period, today. And I think one day that we're going to have one signing day, and it will be the early signing day. The February day will disappear. And I just think, it's going to make recruiting, that much more intense. I think you'll do a lot of, Zoom recruiting, a lot of, meeting, instead of traveling to visit a kid in his home, you might do it on the laptop. So it's going to change, but, recruiting is recruiting. And, I followed recruiting. I can remember Herschel Walker getting recruited back in 1981. And one of the people who recruited him was Chuck Reedy, who was at Clemson. But anyway, recruiting is the lifeblood. It's the hope in this, February, it's cold out, and, the rest of the winter is going to be dictated on how your team did in recruiting. But, some of these players or coaches like Urban Meyer, Nick Saban,
right,
Dabo Sweeney,
right,
they can find talent. They know where to look.
And, I hate to ask this question without being selfish because I want to look up for all other teams. But which particular sports will benefit from these changes during the COVID-19 situation?
Well, I've talked to Gene Sapikoff about it, and Gene finally wrote about it. And here's the thing. Football is easily the number one sport. And I can remember when ESPN asked Pete Rozelle if they could televise the draft, and he goes, who would watch that? Well, guess what? What dominates April now? Not Major League Baseball,
right,
but the draft.
Right.
And then, you have the camps for the NFL. And then in July, you have the NFL and college football getting together. And it's become a year thing. And here's the thing. Americans want football year round. And what I think it would be best for is, let's let the big boys play in the fall. And let's let the other schools like the Citadel or even Wofford or,
right,
the Mid-American Conference, like
right,
a Kent State,
right,
schools like that, have the spring to themselves. They can make a ton of money off of TV revenue. Let's face it. They've tried with the XFL and they tried with the USFL to have spring football. And maybe the spring football that we need is college on a smaller level.
To be continued. Wow. Interesting information. Well, Phil Bowman, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin School Steps.
Well, thank you very much. And you stay safe. And like your mom said, wash your hands.
I definitely will. Definitely will. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Likewise.